And I'm going to say, hello, my name's Andrew Stuck from Walk, Listen, Create. We're a not-for-profit. We're enthusiastically supporting all sorts of people on walking art and couldn't have a better title than Art on the Pilgrim Path as the topic for this event. We're doing all of this in cahoots with the World Trails Network, and my co-host is Laura Aziz. And if you haven't met her, Laura, would you like to say a few words?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to number 5 of our series, I think. We're on number 5. And yeah, really happy to be with everybody today. I'm an artist, the cultural producer and founder of the Saffron Trail Project, and also co-chair of the Arts and Culture World Trails Network Task Force. So really happy to be here alongside Ali Pretty as well, who's in the house as my co-chair colleague on the World Trails Network. Yeah, really excited for tonight's session. So I will. So welcome to our series tonight on the Pilgrim Path, and we're going to be really we're joined by 4 amazing speakers, and I can't wait to unravel with you this journey that we've been on and exploring over the past few months, exploring what pilgrimage really does mean today and what it means to communities across the world, how we interpret it, how we live with it, support it, and keep expanding on its practice. So really excited to sort of hear today from 2 speakers who we've already heard from, but in a very different capacity, I think, tonight. So it'll be interesting to hear a bit more. I will leave it there and hand over to our speakers who are going to all introduce themselves, and then we'll kick off with our first speaker.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kathryn Barush, and I teach art history and religion at the GTU, which is in Berkeley, California. And I take student groups on Camino and have written on art and pilgrimage. And I've been particularly interested in artists who recreate pilgrimage sites that then kind of take on a life of their own and become pilgrimage sites in and of themselves. So I'll be talking a little bit about that tonight.
Shall we hand over to Clara?
Okay, hi everyone. I am Clara Gari, I am Catalan. And basically I am working on walking art and taking artists to a long walks of 300 kilometers every year to create creative communities. Also, I have a very direct relationship with pilgrimage. First, because I did the Camino in 1986, so 40 years ago, and it changed somehow my life. It was my first, it was not my first walk, but it was my first walk alone, and it changed really my life. And then in 2015, I started to bring all my curating programs of the center that I am founder and director to the fact of walking. So all the artistic musicians, dancers, theater players, and visual artists, I brought them to a walk in order to change the reception of the public, because I wasn't happy about the system in which the public was considered today in contemporary art.
Thank
So
you,
somehow,
thank you, Clara. I think we just do the intro and then we'll come back to you in a minute.
sorry.
That's great. It's great. Great start. Will, should we pass over to you?
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I am Professor Emeritus at Columbia University in New York, and my relationship to walking is through ideas and through art history, through pictures of walking. And I'm just finishing up a book. I wrote a book called The Art of Walking, which looks at 100 pictures of walking throughout history and tries to trace how art history and walking have evolved side by side. And right now I'm finishing up a book where two people do the West Highland Way and argue about walking for 100 miles as they cross Scotland. And it's sort of a reverse Pilgrim's Progress where they don't get to heaven, but what they do get is a better understanding of how modern walking was created as a kind of a confrontation between ideas about nature and culture. So that's me for the moment.
Thank you. Roxana?
Hi, I'm Roxana Perez-Mendes. I'm an artist and professor at UNC Chapel Hill. I have walked the Camino Frances and many other walks over the past decade. I've led students on those roads as a way of teaching art, not art about the Camino, but art made from inside walking. I work in video, performance, and installation, and increasingly in the medium of walking and pilgrimage. And so that's the way, the position that I'll be speaking from today, not looking at a pilgrim, but on the road itself.
Amazing. Thank you for all your introductions. I think just to give everybody a bit of context around the structure of the session, each speaker is going to speak for about 7 minutes, and then we'll pass to the next speaker, and then so on forth. So we'll hear 4 presentations, one after the other, and then we'll go into panel discussion between the speakers, and then we'll open the floor to questions. So please do, whilst the speakers are giving their presentations, keep the chat alive. Let's keep it interactive as much as we can, and then when it comes to the chat, you can either read your question out, or we can pick on and draw on those themes as this is going on. So yeah, Andrew, do you want to hand over to the first presenter? Because
well, I think they can hand over themselves. Kate, it's Kathryn Barush first, so Kate, you're up first. Yeah,
Okay.
we can. That's great.
I see that Simon Coleman and who I'm quoting chief here, Michelle Owen, have heard this talk about 10 times, so they have my permission to take a nap. And anyway, I'm going to go through this material quite quickly, and then my idea is that I'll just kind of introduce some artworks from artists that I've written about, and we can kind of we can discuss it further in the Q&A part later. So my own journey into this kind of area of work began in Dharamshala, which is a hill station in North India, where His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama brought his people to safety and exile. The word Dharamshala means spiritual dwelling and is derived from the Sanskrit for dharma, which is religion and sanctuary, and shala, which is a dwelling or a house. And I went there in 2003 to kind of see what I could find out about art making as a sort of pilgrimage process. Thangka mandala paintings like this one map the universe and invite a spiritual journey from the eye to the innermost being and guide the practitioner's mind through spiritual realms and narratives, just like a physical journey connects pilgrims to sacred sites. And if we start asking the monks creating these images what they're feeling, they do describe their work as a sort of pilgrimage in place. So I started to ask myself whether a visual record of a journey, such as an artwork or a souvenir, can send us on a mental or a contemplative pilgrimage. And I can already tell that this is dovetailing with what William Sharpe said earlier. What does this kind of contemplative pilgrimage mean for people who can't travel because of health or economic hardship or monastic commitments? And, more recently, I've been asking, can psychogeographic realities be mapped and imbued in objects? In both form and function, Thangkas really can be compared, I think, to Western illuminations, like this one from the Book of Kells. Objects become a sort of pilgrimage for the person creating the image as well as the viewer. You can imagine the eye as a pilgrim traversing the pathways of the knotwork here, and also in the Thangka mandala that I just showed. Recent scholarship in medieval studies, and if you have questions about this point, I will direct you to Michelle Owing, my wonderful medievalist colleague who's here this evening, has established the importance of manuscripts and maps as sites of mental or stationary pilgrimage for those who could not travel for a variety of reasons. And sometimes pilgrimage badges that were collected were even sewn into the pages of books like this one from, I think it's a Walsingham one on top. And, anyway, the souvenir kind of becomes a site for a contemplative journey in and of itself. And I think we can all agree, especially those of us who have walked the Camino and other pilgrimages, bringing home a gift or a token of the place, like a souvenir, a stamped passport, a stone, a scallop, or something more permanent like a Camino tattoo, can serve as proof that the pilgrim had visited the place, or as a physical manifestation of the spirit, or a charisma, as Simon Coleman has called it, of the sacred center. And I'll just quote Simon. He says, "In this way, the sacred landscape becomes diffused, permeating even the everyday lives of the."
I could, yeah, but I have my camera.
Oops. Oh, I think someone was unmuted. Okay. What do I mean by spirit exactly? Well, I've taken a cue from the Irish poet Seamus Heaney from his essay on the sense of place in his book Preoccupations. I've always personally been drawn to the idea of the what we call thin spaces in Celtic Christianity, where one feels like the veil has been drawn back and one can connect with the past, with ancestors. And in Christianity in particular, the spirit is the part that we humans can use to communicate with the divine. So Heaney writes of the features of landscape as a mode of communication with something other than ourselves, a something to which we ourselves still feel like we might belong. He speaks of the transfer of spirit as a marriage between the geographical country and the country of the mind, whether that country takes its tone unconsciously from a shared inherited culture or from a consciously savored literary culture, or I would personally add the arts, or all the visual arts, or all of the above. He writes that the bond between the geographic and the imagined constitutes the sense of place in its richest possible manifestation. So I just want to introduce a couple of artists who have kind of gone beyond the collecting of souvenirs and actually mapped pilgrimages onto either the built environment or through assemblages of objects. And I'm going to go quickly, but we can come back to any of these folks and their practices when we get to the Q&A panel afterward. So my first example is Phil Volker and his backyard Camino in Vashon Island in the Pacific Northwest. Phil had gotten interested in walking the Camino de Santiago, and a bunch of things came together in his life that made it seem like it could be a real possibility, including some money that he didn't from a relative who had died and some extra time off. And it started to really seem like a real, genuine possibility. And right around that time, he also unfortunately ended up getting a cancer diagnosis, which had already metastasized to his liver and lungs. And his recovery oncologist, Dr. David Zucker, suggested that he just start walking as part of the recovery process. So he did this and just started to walk around this circuit in his back garden. And after a while, he realized he was clocking in a lot of miles. And so he took out a map of Spain and started to track his progress along his backyard Camino. So he would stop when he reached a city like Burgos, and he and his wife, Rebecca, would have wine and tapas at the picnic table in the backyard. And he effectively mapped and walked the entire Camino de Santiago several times. I actually looked at his diary and calculated the miles that he walked, and it was from about Vashon Island to Manhattan, New York. And then somewhere in there, he actually went to Spain, had enough time off his chemo treatment to actually go to Spain, walk the Camino, and then ended up back in his backyard. So I interviewed a bunch of folks who had walked with Phil in his backyard, and I concluded that this magical space was not a nostalgic reiteration of a Camino in Spain, but was really engaged and experienced by many on its own terms. So someone wrote here, Phil's Camino is indeed a full sensory experience. I began to create a walk around our property as a result. He is inspiring many to do the same, to be wherever you are at your own pilgrimage. We, along with 6 others, walked Phil's Camino. It was a lovely sunny day, and we even had a pilgrim pup bounding excitedly alongside us. The walk and the subsequent pilgrim meal transported us right back to Spain. So you can kind of see how there's a genuine kind of transfer of spirit happening here. So, and here's Phil doing the backyard Camino with Sister Joyce Cox. He made it actually completely accessible, so even folks who have issues with mobility can walk the backyard Camino using a backyard, the lawnmower like Sister Joyce is doing here. Okay, so Phil was really not alone in reconstructing a pilgrimage, so I decided to do a book on this, and I interviewed a lot of pilgrim artists, and I know we're going to hear from some more this evening about the artworks and environments that they've created, which are linked to their journeys and continue to act as vibrant places of encounter and embodied experience, and where specifically these reconstructions took on a life of their own. So for me, the interviews really affirmed that the act of creating new pilgrimages as a souvenir of the journey, as well as experiencing them, were healing. And over and over and over again, the artists talked about a sense of proximity with their ancestors, with each other, and a closeness with the divine. So Sri Bhakti Mayama's art practice is creating these little cigar box shrines using souvenirs and objects that she collected while on pilgrimage. And they include natural objects like scallop shells, but also tiny statues and other souvenirs. And these little miniature grottos kind of function in the same way, I argued, as two-scale or miniaturized reconstructions of myriad sacred sites the world over. There are a bunch in India connected to Lord Krishna, and we can also think of Lourdes grottos in the Christian tradition, which you can find all over the world. Then I moved from the built environment to musical expression. So I looked at the British Pilgrimage Trust and their project of rescuing and rewilding songs, both ancient and modern. Co-founder Guy Hayward was actually a guest with me on the first episode of this podcast or webcast series. And the chapter looks at ritual practice of singing and sound making and the importance of the embodied experience of moving through the British landscape in this process. I wrote about the idea that a song sung while on pilgrimage can become a souvenir as the journey. And in the case of ancient medieval pilgrimage songs and chants, I wrote that music can translate the pilgrimage of the past into the present. Then I looked at an installation piece on a former prisoner transport vehicle by visual artist Gisela Insuasta entitled Hacienda Marcos Otra Vez, Making Marks Again. The piece comprises sculptural elements and a little altarcito on the dashboard containing an assemblage of objects and souvenirs collected from pilgrimage sites in the Andes. And in this case, each object gives visibility to stories of trauma and healing, especially her own family's experience of immigration from the 1970s. Finally, I looked at the idea of transfer of spirit from sacred locuses to loci to representations through this case study of an outdoor labyrinth, which is at the Jesuit Retreat Center of Los Altos, California, designed and installed by Tom Nan. And finally, I looked at artist and filmmaker Chiara Ambrosio's series of art zines called As Far as the Eye Can Travel. The title invokes the medieval idea of the contemplative pilgrimage of the eye through manuscripts, which I mentioned before. And the objects are really, this is Chiara's little trailer. It's really lovely. I'll do it one more time. So as you can see, the objects are really interactive and cinematic. On one page, there's a panoramic landscape. The next is an intimate portrait with the aim of really carrying the viewer as far as the eye can travel, from Coney Island to Palermo and beyond. Her project is an archive of landscapes and spaces, and also an invitation to a voyage in a very extra textual way. And she writes, to talk about transcendence, to translate the mystifying and often unspeakable revelations that occur in those fleeting moments of deep connection with a place, a person, or an object, what holds on to you and hurdles you towards a much wider history than your own singular one. And I think her words encapsulate much of what is explored through all the chapters in the book, from Phil's Camino to cigar box grottos. And that is the sense of a really tangible presence of the past and connection through these representations of space and place and artworks, maps, manuscripts, and labyrinths. And I think I am at time, so I will stop there and let me stop sharing if I can. Okay, I will pass the torch. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
And before I begin, I want to acknowledge, as I usually do, that the University of North Carolina and the land that it sits on is of the Okanochee, Shikori, and Ino, Tsatsapaha indigenous North American peoples. And I carry that acknowledgement with me wherever I walk, because the land is never neutral. It is, in fact, where I want to begin. Let me get this. All right. So as I was saying, the walk has never been innocent. And this tradition was built by artists in motion. So many of the first pilgrims were makers, masons, painters, carvers, traveling the route, so from site to site, building and crafting the very thing the pilgrim would come to undergo. And they would take liberties where they could. Of course, it was carving that strays from, the protocol, the program that they had, a local intervention, perhaps a maker's own hand inside a kind of codified form. And the road to Santiago itself was work in progress, and it assembled over generations. And that is the company that my students rejoin. The third slide. So here is the claim that I like to state, that most pilgrimage art looks at the pilgrim, and I work from inside the walk. Depicted, observed, pictured from a distance, all that keeps pilgrimage at arm's length. And the interior view treats the walk itself as the material, something undergone in the body, not pictured. And that's slide number 4. And when I say medium, I mean it's the way that a sculptor means clay, or a filmmaker means video. Before pilgrimage is subject, it's a material. Its properties are not metaphors. They are what makes what the work is made of. And it's one of the things that does something to perception. So take them in turn. Duration is the days in the walk dissolves deadline. Time stops. The thing you spend and become a thing you inhabit. Fatigue, the tiring body drops its defenses, and perception sharpens precisely as the will to control it falls away. Repetition, the same act, step after step, day after day, turns motion to rhythm and rhythm into attention. An encounter, the road delivers people and the place unbidden. What arrived cannot be staged, only met. This is why I placed pilgrimage at what Rosalind Krauss called the expanded field. The walk does not illustrate an idea. The walk is the idea, performed in the body over distance. Slide number 5. And this is where the medium comes social practice. Turner gave the threshold a second modern name, limnoid. Where liminal is obligatory and communal, the limnoid is voluntary and chosen. Made an art and leisure rather than compelled by religious duty. The modern Camino is limnoid in exactly this sense. No longer compelled by the shrine, the journey itself has become a rationale. And because it is chosen rather than fixed, what constitutes it stays fluid, relation made in the moving, not settled in advance. The artist Guillermo Gomez Peña shows what this looks like pushed to its political edge. He calls himself a performance pilgrim. His border crossings make the act of transversal the medium itself, the identity chosen in motion, not fixed by origin. Read through Lorna Crabnall's Cuerpo Territorio, and through counter-mapping, the walking body carries territory and history across official geographies. The walk becomes a quiet refusal of speed and extraction, a social practice that constitutes who we are in the moving rather than fixing us in a place. And if walking is a medium and a social practice, it can be taught like one, not as a topic to study, but as a studio to enter. And the next slide, please. I've led around 50 UNC students on the Camino Francés across for more than a decade of faculty-led program, with my collaborator Mario Marzan as the Campo Research Studio. On the Camino, the same road is the classroom, the studio, the field site at once. And the framework is research creation, art making, theory, and inquiry braided together. And pedagogy becomes one of the most demanding part of my artistic practice takes, because I'm guiding the whole group, not walking alone. And next slide. So what does the walk actually produce? 4 things: attention, slow distance, retaining how students see, and the work begins long before the object is made. The encounter, the people, the hospitaleros, the land itself, the collaborators, the subjects that it captures, the trace, the video, the performance, the sketchbook, that hold on to what the body carried back, and reflection, the interior account of what shifted in the walker and the work itself. The student becomes a cartography of their own journey. In the next slide. And let me make that concrete with assignments that the students actually do. When there's a difficult task, it's a walk of the full stage in silence and solitude, no conversation, no headphones, and write a performance score for it. At the Crucifero, they read the score to the wind and leave the stone that they've carried from their home. The ritual, they enact a Camino ritual of their own making, repetition of the material in the body that keeps account. And the trace, the sketchbook, the field recording, the performance becomes a field guide to experience, not a souvenir of it. And this is the lineage that I teach from, the Abramovic and Ole, walking the Great Wall towards each other, Francis Alice, Tertiary Shea. So pilgrimage as the medium and the students as the artist. And so the last slide. And it's here where my interior view finally matters. The walk is registered in the body. It roughly doubles your daily cleric expenditure, and nearly half of all pilgrims report some sort of injury. The body confronting its own limits is what sharpens perception. And the suffering isn't incidental, it is where the learning lives. That is the threshold no classroom can reproduce, not depicted, not observed, undergone. And thank you.
So what does a pilgrim look like? Well, in early art, we see pilgrims heading out through the wilderness. They go through towns, they go through the countryside, and eventually they're going to a holy space or shrine. You know, they might go to Canterbury or Rome. Around 1400, the Pope said anyone who took a pilgrimage to Rome basically had full remission of sins. And it's like a get out of hell free card. But wherever they went, the pilgrims had a pretty standard look. Now we're just talking about conventional iconography. If you go back to ancient times, here's a Greek pilgrim, and he's got the usual stuff. He's got a staff, sort of like a walking stick today. He's got some sort of rucksack, and off on the pilgrim trail, probably to Delphi here in this case. But the Middle Ages, here's Saint Judicus of Brittany. And we see very, very much the classic iconography of the medieval Christian pilgrim. We've got the staff, we've got the hat with cockle shells because St. James appeared, came out of the sea covered in seashells, and so that became the symbol of the Camino. But also the saint has a script to hold some food scraps to extend for begging and so on along the way. And you see the rough artist idea of what the Santiago Cathedral looks like in the background. And by the mid-19th century, it's still pretty much the same conventions. You know, you've got something to carry, something to help you along on your way. You've got some kind of robe that is timeless, and there you are. But as we've been seeing in this series, the modern evolving definitions of pilgrimage raise a lot of different ideas about what a pilgrimage might be, and therefore how a pilgrim might actually look in terms of outward aspect. So at a fundamental level, we have pilgrimages that, in a sense, have a why, a where, and a when. And I'll start with the why. And that's where it gets interesting, because a pilgrim is by definition incomplete. A pilgrim needs something, is looking for something, is seeking something, transformation, openness, maybe a new kind of practice that could be spiritual or ethical. But how open is the openness? And what matters most? Is it the path? Is it the goal? Is it the leaving behind, or is it the moving toward? You know, what's really going on here? Well, it occurred to me that maybe a flaneur could be a pilgrim, depending on how loose our definitions are. Do you need a direction, or are you just looking for an experience? So I have here a picture of one of the early depictions of a flaneur from 1842, but it was the very same year that colored blazes were introduced in Fontainebleau, near Paris. And so you had the first woodland directions showing people how to get around and how to find the trails and the objects that they were looking for. So you could, in 1842, you could be wandering aimlessly, or you could be guided, and maybe both sets of people were, in a sense, pilgrims. Traditionally, however, pilgrims need a place to go. Most famous one in Britain, obviously, Shrine at Canterbury. Here's the earliest known depiction of the martyrdom of St. Thomas Becket. He was killed in 1170. He was canonized in record time by 1173. People reported miracles happening on the spot where he was killed and all around there very shortly after the murder. And they moved his grave up to, gave it a chapel, made an incredible altar. This is a digital reconstruction of what it looked like. Henry VIII destroyed the thing, and there's nothing left of it. But in 1220, there were more than 100,000 people a year coming to visit this shrine and receive whatever spiritual rewards could be received. So it was quite something. And here's a classic picture. This is actually the first book illustration of pilgrims at Canterbury. And they're riding horses. You know, when you say you're dealing with walking and you're dealing with pilgrimage, of course, everybody says, oh, Canterbury Tales. But nope, they've got horses. But they did get off occasionally, and they did pretty much interact all the way along the way in a way that's hard to imagine on horses in terms of all their discussion. Here is I think a Flemish picture from the 1400s that really emphasizes the leaving home aspect of pilgrimage. And you see a man and his son way in the background, and kind of coming closer to us, and then coming closer still as they're basically trying to leave the city. And it puts us in the position of being a little bit closer to Santiago than they are. And you see the characteristic scallop shells on their hats. You see that they've got their backpack or a front pack here. They've got the staff. They've got the bowl. They're all set and ready to go. They've got the classic gear. One of the things about medieval pilgrimage, though, is that if you arrive at a really good pilgrimage site like Chartres, you can do it all over again. You can do it all over again, in this case, through the labyrinth, the very famous labyrinth. The labyrinth is not a maze. You don't get lost. You've got to follow the path that it gives you. But in following the path that it gives you, you are, in a sense, retracing in miniature the path that you've already traced as a spiritual journey. And the whole cathedral, in a sense, functions that way with its incredible stained glass and statuary and everything else. But when we get to the labyrinth, we're kind of getting also into metaphorical territory. We're sort of saying, well, okay, a pilgrimage is not, 500 or 1,000 miles. It's something else again. So here's a 17th century illustration. This was a very popular book all over Europe. There were English translations, and it was in German and Latin and everything else. And here we see our pilgrim, usual stuff, right there in the middle. And he's sort of on the top of hedges like at Hampton Court. And he's on his way to a tall tower. There's angels on the top of it lighting a signal fire. And there's people walking along the edges of these things that he's walking on. And one guy on the left has fallen into the ditch, and he's sort of raising his hand for help. Another guy's out walking his dog. He's totally confident of the way toward heaven. And it's one of the most famous of all pilgrimages. It's a pilgrimage that never took place except in John Bunyan's head. This was the most popular book in England for about 3 centuries, the most printed book, the most read book, most discussed book. And here what Bunyan did is he imagined himself in prison where he was when he wrote this. And we see in the top left there, we see his allegorical self called Pilgrim. He's got his backpack, he's got a staff, he's got the book, the Bible, he's reading. He's going off to the celestial city, but he's going to run into all kinds of pitfalls. He's going to have to go through the valley of shadow of death. He's going to deal with the slough of despond. He's going to meet with all sorts of people that are called things like deceitful and mistrustful and so on and so forth. He's having a lot of trouble, but he does it all because he's a Protestant. He's doing it all in his head in a dream. He doesn't have to go on a Catholic journey to the Holy Land. He could take the Pilgrim's Progress through dreaming, reading a book, and so on. And then this leads us really, once you get into this metaphorical territory, it leads us into this question of when, the when of a pilgrimage. Back in even in the 6th century, there were a lot of people who said, well, if I'm going to walk in the way of the Lord, does that mean I just keep walking? How literal is the injunction to walk with Jesus? So there were these gyrovags. These literally just means people going in circles. And they were a group of monks who, not really a group in the sense they were totally disorganized, but they went around from monastery to monastery begging, and then also begged from the local populace. This was all over Europe. And Saint Benedict said, nope, no way. These people are useless. They contribute nothing. They're gluttonous. They're contributing nothing to the social order or the heavenly order. And to this day, the Catholic Church says a pilgrimage is inherently a transient experience. It blends spiritual purpose with physical practice. So that's the traditional definition. And I must say, myself as who's someone raised Catholic, and who's taken a lot of walks, I still kind of go with that definition. I'm not much of a spiritual traveler. I like to physically travel to a place. So what I've been talking about so far is art. It's about the motion of pilgrimage, very traditional art. But now I want to switch over to something that is rather different, I think a little more unconventional in terms of the way we think about pilgrims. So these are some pilgrims that are interested not in just sort of a transitory event or a little bit of remission of sins. What they're interested in is founding a settlement and eventually commemorating a decisive act, a pilgrimage with real world impact. Can you guess where I'm going? In the North American context, pilgrim means one thing. It means those pilgrims, the 1620 pilgrims who landed at Plymouth. And here we have one depiction of it. The really depictions came along in the 19th century and became part of the whole national story of the United States. This depiction is in the Capitol Rotunda, right there at the center of our government. And it shows the pilgrims at Plymouth getting ready to head off into the unknown, because their place of pilgrimage is the wilderness writ large. And here they are arriving. And this picture is in the White House. Now, there are pilgrims to this day in the White House, as you may have noticed if you read the news, people who believe in exactly the same kinds of things. So what we have here is a patriarchal and political pilgrimage, second only to Columbus, really, in terms of American myth-making and the idea of what the United States is. There were settlements all over the east coast of North America before these pilgrims arrived, but their story took over. And here they are giving thanks for arriving. And with these Plymouth pilgrims, I really think that what's going on here is that the where expands to fill the whole continent, and the when lasts for centuries, and the why is the establishment of a theological nation state whose dream is very much alive for millions of Americans at the present time. So this is not just a transient kind of thing. This is very much part of the United States today. Here's a fanciful depiction of the first Thanksgiving, time of World War I, 1914. This is pictures in a museum in Leiden, where those pilgrims spent their 10 years before they decided that things were getting too hot for them in Europe and they better just go off to North America. You'll see that the Native Americans who collaborated with them on that first Thanksgiving are off in the background, sitting quietly out of the way while the patriarch here offers up his prayers and blessings. And a lot of the interpretation that these pilgrims had themselves of their own situation was that, gee, everything is going so well for us, God must have ordained all of this. And so one of the things that they found is a sort of self-reinforcing story. They thought, gee, we've survived. Somebody must have meant us to survive. These locals have helped us. Therefore, they must have been meant to help us, and so on and so forth. And this gradually snowballed into the kind of the world cultural governmental construct of the United States of America that we see today. This is what the first statue I ever saw in my life. And it's in Springfield, Massachusetts, and then there are 25 copies all over the United States. And the first statue is called the Puritan, and then the second one was called the Pilgrim. But either way, it's the same guy doing the same thing, which is basically striding forth to let the continent know that these people from Plymouth are here and that they have an idea of how things ought to be done, and they're going to do them. And so that's part of the cultural myth-making of the Pilgrim state. 1950s Pilgrim children. This is just the era in which I grew up. I could have been dressed in that costume. And if you do grow up in New England, this iconography is all around you. And then it quickly, once you hit the 20th century, turned into any kind of consumable, merchandisable kind of consumer kind of art. Notice, of course, that the Native Americans just fade out of this picture, and it's all turkeys and blunderbusses. And this is 1950. Marilyn Monroe comes along and puts on the costume, got her turkey to shoot. So once the myth is installed, then you can do anything with it. And that's what's pretty much has happened in the United States with this. But it's a very durable myth, and it doesn't go away, and it's incredibly pervasive. So what I wanted to finish with was just this quotation from T.S. Eliot to take us back to Canterbury Cathedral. Thomas Becket in Eliot's play Murder in the Cathedral is wondering, he knows that Henry II is coming toward him. He knows that he's standing up for the church, although no one ever expected him to. The state is putting its pressure on the church. But here we are back in the 1100s, and he believes in the separation of church and state. And so he's going to say, no, this is spiritual, and I'm going to pray and look after my my flock. But he's also thinking, if somebody kills me, if I become a martyr, I could have a lot of influence. And he's going through all the different reasons for being a martyr and what's going to happen to him and so on, and what's going to happen to the church. And then he arrives at this phrase that has stuck with me ever since I read this play. The last temptation is the greatest treason, to do the right deed for the wrong reason. And what I want to leave you with is the idea that pilgrimage can be like that. You can have some wrong reasons, I think, for being a pilgrim. So my point here this evening is simply, when it comes to pilgrimage, I wouldn't just accept it as a all-around good thing. I would say, if a pilgrim's coming toward you, think about it a little bit, and consider Eliot Murder in the Cathedral and what the reasons are for this pilgrimage, where it's going, and particularly the duration of it. And watch out for people who want to be pilgrims for the next 3 centuries and take over your land. Thank you.
Okay. What I will explain to you is quite different. I will not speak about pilgrimage as art, but about pilgrimage as pilgrimage, as an experience. And I wanted to compare 2 moments of my experience of pilgrimage, which are very separate in time. The first experience is when I did the Camino. It was in 1996, so about some 40 years ago. At that moment, the Camino was not a touristic place. There was no guide. No, the friends of the Camino were trying to mark with yellow marks some parts, but this was quite developed in some parts of Spain, like Navarra, but completely absent in other parts. And I was looking today. This is my Compostela. This is the Compostela, and this is the stamp I got in Estella 40 years ago. And there, the place was the Estella, which is the point of the Camino where I centered my presentation, was a small city of the same size, more or less, as it is today, but very homogeneous, very much untouched by immigration. And they had in their own ADN, in their own cultural legacy, the Camino. So it was very easy at that moment to be hosted by someone in the city, as in the other places of the Camino. But at the same time, the Camino was very silent. No, there were maybe every summer, at that moment, there were passing about 1,800 people every year in the Camino. Today, there are between 40,000 and 65,000. And these are the ones that are counted, because some people don't go for the stamps or don't take the Compostela or don't do the whole Camino. So the situation was completely different. And in my case, the situation had to do more with the experience of walking alone than with the religious pilgrimage, because it was my first travel alone. And after that, in the 70s, 80s, the touristic system developed a lot. And it is very amazing that the Camino has taken this prestige all around the world, being so that so many other places in the world have pilgrimage centers, that Mexico is such an important place for pilgrimage, that Argentina has the Difunta Correa and the other places of pilgrimage also, that India is the essential place for pilgrimage in the world. But I don't know why the Camino has become like the most important and the most known symbol of pilgrimage. So last year, there is a meeting that the Ministerio de Cultura, the culture ministry in Spain, makes every year, called Cultura y Ruralidades, Culture and Ruralities. As you may maybe know, culture management is distributed in Spain among all the regions, among all the autonomic regions, and central government tries to find activities that link the different regions as their own mission. And one of these projects is this meeting called Culture and Ruralities that takes place in different places every year, in different cities every year. And that year it happened in Estella, which is a city of 14,000 people, so a small city, which has some kind of divergence in this moment, because say 2-3% of people lives from the Camino, I mean economically from the Camino, with hostels, selling souvenirs, offering food, things like this, and the rest lives completely out of the Camino and totally independent. For them, the Camino is something touristic that happens there and stays there, with a sensibility that has been very much reduced from the 86 when I went there for the first time. I mean, when I went there for the first time, the people knew that the Camino, they had never done it, and they didn't know exactly what it was, but it was something of their ancestors, and there was something of their tradition and of their legacy. That's why they would open the door and have you in their own homes, also because it was not happening very often, and that's why also because there was an association of Friends of the Camino that was the first impulsor of what the Camino became after. 40 years after, the population of Estella has not grown, but it is completely different. The proportion of immigration is quite high regarding other levels and other rates in other cities of Spain, especially small cities. And the people living in Estella has either they live on the Camino and then they are completely inside, or they live out of the Camino and then they are completely in another reality. So this divergence of reality amazed me and a lot. I found it very special. And I still think that when we speak of pilgrimages, we think of walking, but pilgrimages have been in many different ways, and they are not all of them about walking. And what is really striking, what is really changing us, is not that we do a pilgrimage, it is that we walk. It is walking that changes our lives. Because if you do a pilgrimage by car, a lot of things can happen. In India, for example, there are a lot of pilgrimages by bus, and pilgrimages by plane, and pilgrimages by car. And of course, there are what changes in these people, what changes in this community has much more to do with deep religion and with deep spiritual relationship to God. But what really has somehow saved us as Occidentals and quite atheistics is just that our conception of pilgrimage is related to walk. So for me, this first pilgrimage in '86 was very, very special. As I said, it changed my life. Secondly, in 2015, I was in charge of my art center that I had co-funded with other artists, very frustrated with the systems in which visual arts, performing arts also, but especially visual arts, was presented, and about this enormous distance between artists and audiences. And that's why remembering the Camino and remembering also other travels and other walks that I had done, because I have been walking all my life, I decided to bring all these artists to walk. And that is what I do now since 12 years, the Grand Tour, which is a walk of 300 kilometers that we do every year with artists of all disciplines. So in synthesis, one thing is pilgrimage, one thing is walking, and the experiences have very different results. One thing is spiritual development, and the other is just having to do with objects, prayers, things like this. And finally, sometimes we as artists have to think that there are things that are, same as now we realize that there are things we call more than human. There are things more than art. And pilgrimage is, and walking also, is much more than art. So art should be included in that instead of being like a sphere. We sometimes have to do this exercise of coming out of ourselves, coming out of our works, and see that from the point of view of the pilgrim or from the point of view of the walker. So that is what I had to say to you. After, I will like to discuss some sentences that I heard of Roxana that I really signed and completely identified, and of Bill also.
It sounds like a nice way to segue into the panel discussion, Clara. I think maybe if you had a point to bring up from either Bill's talk or from Roxana's, and then we can go from there.
One thing that Roxana said that I signed completely, and I think that would give us a lot to talk. In the last or previous last slide, she had wrote, the interior account is the artwork. I think that this is very essential of not only of pilgrimage, of walking, and very reflective of what I said, that more than art. Because I think that one of the very good things that walking art brings to art is to dissolve the artwork, because this is what allows the community to share altogether an experience that is much more important than an object. I don't know if you think that, Roxana.
I do. I think that that's part of the the flow of the walk, and being part of the experience is allows there to be both the interior experience of the walker and that of the public space in which you're being viewed. And so you ultimately do dissolve the walls. And so it also makes it, one of the questions that I saw was like, how does this become therefore something that exists in the gallery? And so in many respects, this work, this archetype resists that. It is not, in many respects, you don't expect to go to to watch a play in a gallery. You go to watch a play in a theater, and you go to see a walking artist out in the open. So yeah, I agree with Clara's description.
Yeah, and
Anybody else
also
wants to
I
go?
think that there is one thing which is also very important, and it is that in other cultures, in other contexts, not in different than our Occidental, the art is for God, and God is first, and art is second. And this freedom and this autonomy that we have given to art and has been the source of so many richness and maybe it's our contribution to humanity, has its limits. And one of the limits is this polarization, which is for me very negative, of the audience and the artist. In processions, in pilgrimage, in cathedrals, in all these things, everybody has a place. And things cannot happen and events cannot happen if all these people is not there. Not only the big masters of carving or the priests. Everybody, even the kid that wears a candle, or everybody has a place. And this makes something that is very important for communities. And we have a little bit forgot that. So that's what walking art, and very especially walking art with a religious seal, like pilgrimage, can bring to this moment.
Yeah, and I tend to still, there's the secular part in me, part of the I think of like the art the experience of everyday life, the kind of aesthetic mountain that, at the top sits all things beautiful, magical that are come from nature and are, divinely made in ways that we can only draw off from, and then all other things in life kind of fall in there. And, the encounters that one has daily in your life, and those that are kind of charmed together by a pilgrimage experience, all fall into the areas of where art lies. And so, I have, I tend to lean into the modern experience of the modern idea of transit as the journey is the pilgrimage. However, I respect very much that there is a tradition that it holds on to.
Very interesting. I think that's where those kind of concretizing of that tradition was quite interesting this evening. Each pilgrim had a bowl, a staff, and a hat and a shell, and thinking about the iconography of that, and then the power of that static nature of what tradition can be like. So I think maybe Bill or Kathryn, you had anything to add to those comments, I guess.
Well, I can just add, in terms of accoutrements that pilgrims have, you notice that those traditional medieval pilgrims, they've got their bowl and their shells and their staff. They don't have blunderbusses and weapons. You know, it's very different kind of approach to the world. And it's one thing to head out on an established pilgrimage route, and it's quite another thing to see yourself as going where no man has gone before in a sort of Star Trek way. And they literally saw themselves as taking an errand in the wilderness, and that they were going to, the American pilgrims were going to do something very different than pilgrims had done before. So they took the metaphoric idea of pilgrimage as a search, a spiritual search, but they also saw it as having really physical, real world context. And they needed a place where they could all together do what they wanted to do. And that's another thing I think that really distinguishes the American sit from, you may have 40,000 people on the Camino, but they're joined in the idea of the Camino, whatever that is, however they interpret it. But it's quite another thing to get a couple hundred people who say, okay, let's hire a ship and go and live according to the laws that we have figured out for ourselves, and then go do it in the place that we've selected. So it's just amazing, really, how much variety there can be in this concept of pilgrimage. And what I just wanted to show tonight was just how radically one radical set was able to redefine that. And although they were incredibly marginal people at the time, subsequent history has made them incredibly important thanks to the huge influence of the United States on the rest of the world.
I would like also point out also something that I think is important, and it is the difference between community and individual experience. And I think that this is the salvation of the touristic Camino, because still, even with this mass of tourists, you still can do your own travel alone when this is interior. And I asked Rita Deep, who is today among us. The other day we were talking in France in a meeting, and both he and myself are walkers, and we spoke a little bit about our experiences walking. Of course, I don't walk as much as Rita does, because I think he walks all the time, or nearly all the time. But we spoke about this interior loneliness that allows you to be there alone in the middle of the community. And as well as this communitarian experience, for me, is a treasure that I try to cultivate and to develop in the travels that I organize. I think that the other side, this experience of relating to communities being alone, is very important also, and is one of the essentials of the pilgrimage. So I would like Rita to speak a lot about that, because I think he really can bring an experience that is not common, as a lot of working artists speak a lot about art, but they don't walk, which is one of the difficulties of working artists, that they work very little. So please, Rita, could you...
Tu peux me poser la question en français si tu veux. Bonsoir, hello to everybody.
C'est vrai, j'avais oublié. Oui, j'ai un peu mis en question la différence entre marcher en communauté dans les pèlerinages, et spécialement dans les caminos, et la personne qui marche seule et qui est capable de se montrer toute seule ou de se relationner toute seule à la communauté, et comment ça fait créer un univers différent. Alors, je voulais que tu expliques un peu ton expérience.
Alors, je vais parler un petit peu, comme j'ai fait le chemin de Compostelle il y a quelques années. Tu sais, je suis parti de Paris il y a quelques années, depuis la tour Saint-Jacques jusqu'à Saint-Jacques de Compostelle. Alors, je vais te parler d'un morceau qui est assez intéressant. À l'époque, j'ai fait ce qu'on appelle le chemin de Tours. Le chemin de Tours, toute une partie en fait du chemin était où il y avait personne pour accueillir en fait. Il y avait que des gens, des individus à travers des structures, une association. Il y avait donc je marchais tout seul beaucoup et j'étais accueilli par des gens tous les soirs. Il y avait quelque
Do you want me to translate or more or less you understand what he's saying? What do you say, Andrew?
I think it'd be worth if we had a bit of a translation. I know we've got Anne-Marie as well on the call, and Anne-Marie will be helping Rita in a forthcoming event where we got Rita as one of our presenters. So I don't know, Anne-Marie, if you want to do a translation or whether we leave it for Clara and she has a double act.
Tu peux répéter un tout petit peu ce que tu as dit juste avant? Tu parlais d'une partie de le Camino, oui?
Alors oui, donc j'ai fait le chemin de Compostelle il y a quelques années, il y a à peu près 12 ans, et je suis parti de Paris jusqu'à Saint-Jacques-de-Compostelle, donc
He
de la
did
tour Saint-Jacques.
some years ago, he did the
Yeah.
Camino from Paris to Compostela.
Ok. À ce moment-là, et toute une partie du chemin, depuis Paris jusqu'à Tours, elle était abandonnée parce que le chemin a été abandonné longtemps. Et donc, j'étais accueilli à travers un réseau de personnes tous les jours. Donc, c'était pas, il y avait pas de gîte, il y avait rien.
The section from Paris to Tours was practically abandoned. There really wasn't much of a network there, but there were some people that could. There was a network of some people that could welcome you to stay, but the road itself wasn't well traveled.
Et là, il y avait quelque chose d'assez intéressant qui m'avait frappé, c'est que la plupart des gens, qui étaient de conditions sociales très différentes, il y avait des ingénieurs à la retraite, des ouvriers, même des contestes, etc., plein de gens de conditions sociales extrêmement différentes. Il y avait quelque chose pratiquement commun à tout le monde, c'est que tout le monde accueillait et écoutait le récit de la journée ou autre, et me demandait de signer un livre d'or, tu sais.
So it wasn't like in some parts of the Camino where you have centers that are designed for the travelers to stay, but here it was more a network, an informal network of people who welcomed the travelers, and it could be anything. Sometimes they were retired engineers or teachers, and each one of them though had a book, like a visiting book. So when they had their pilgrim come and say, they'd get them to sign their visitor's book.
Et alors, longtemps, je me suis posé la question, parce que dans le processus du don contre don, je me suis posé la question, qu'est-ce qu'il gagne, qu'est-ce qu'il récupère à travers ces gens qui traversent? Et en fait, je me suis rendu compte que ces gens-là voyageaient, faisaient le chemin de pèlerinage à travers les pèlerins. Et donc, c'est un pèlerinage continu pour eux, qui n'avait pas de fin, je crois.
Okay. So he started to ask himself what was actually exchanged in this process, because there was always a sense of an exchange when you stay. Someone welcomes you, you stay with them, they give you a meal, and then what are you giving back? And what he realized was that these people who were stationary and welcoming the pilgrimages were having another, like a pilgrimage in reverse, in a sense. They were traveling the route continually by way of the pilgrims who came and told them their stories of the route.
Ça, c'était une des parties, parce que le chemin est abandonné, une des parties qui m'a beaucoup intéressé, puisque c'était là, il y avait des réelles rencontres entre le marcheur, le pèlerin, un pèlerin qui habite le chemin, la rencontre avec les habitants du bas-côté. C'était une des dimensions les plus importantes, parce que quand on marche beaucoup, longtemps, alors on devient d'une certaine manière habitant du chemin, et toute l'opération qui se fait, c'est la rencontre aussi avec les gens du bas-côté, qui est totalement différente, en tout cas pour le chemin de Campo, de la rencontre des gens qui marchent avec toi. Ce sont deux régimes de rencontre.
So the pilgrim, it becomes someone who inhabits the route, and then they have an encounter with someone who is a stationary inhabitant of the region. And this exchange happens when the pilgrim stops. They're still en route in a way, but they have an exchange with the stationary inhabitants, and then through that, the stationary inhabitants have their own experience of the pilgrim trail.
Alors, une autre chose qui est liée, en tout cas pour une longue marche, un long pèlerinage, pour moi, c'est la question du corps. La question du corps du coût vital, parce que historiquement, le chemin de Compostelle était aussi, j'allais dire, a pu être aussi une punition, c'est-à-dire pour faire le chemin de Compostelle était un truc de pénitence. Donc la question du corps est très, très importante. Là, ce qui m'intéresse, c'est que quand on marche très longtemps, il y a une rencontre entre la quantité de marche et l'intensité. C'est la quantité qui accouche de l'intensité. Matisse disait une chose ou quelque chose qui était attribué à Matisse. Il disait 1 mètre carré de bleu est plus bleu qu'1 centimètre carré de bleu.
Okay, that's a lot.
Voilà. Okay,
It's a lot to get through, but he also something he realized on the very long walks that he's done is what's important in terms of the experience of the body, what he calls a coût vital, a vital cost or a physical cost, because one of the original ideas of a pilgrimage, and maybe the pilgrimage of Compostela in particular, was a sense of penitence, and like the idea that you had to suffer on the walk. And so it started to get him thinking about the relationship between the amount of time you walk and also the intensity of that walk. And he quoted Matisse, who said there's a big difference between a centimeter squared of blue and a meter squared of blue in terms of the intensity, and that's something you experience on the walk.
Et pour finir, c'est que dans la marche, la quantité de marche, marcher longtemps en tout cas, au pèlerinage, marcher très longtemps, au bout d'un moment, la répétition fait en sorte qu'on fait tomber le masque social, et c'est la condition même de la rencontre sur le chemin. À un moment donné, et ça ne peut se concevoir qu'en marche solitaire.
Okay, so just to finish, you were saying that there's something about the repetition on the long walks that means that the social masks fall, and that's also important, like walking alone as well, that the kind of masks that you create for yourself, they start to disappear, and then that's important part of the process of walking alone, and that's what allows for real encounters on the pilgrimage. Okay.
Merci, Rhoda. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Thank you.
So Kathryn, you have your hand up. Let's pass on.
Yeah. Can I continue in English, or I could try in French? I'll continue in English.
I think.
There's I just wanted to mention that I was reading Phil, who I mentioned earlier, his diary of kind of forging his backyard Camino and his experience walking the Camino in Spain. And he recounted a story about walking alongside a Spanish pilgrim who and they were hungry. It was along the Meseta, and the Spanish pilgrim was rustling around in their bag to find something to eat, and eventually unearthed a candy bar and unwrapped the candy bar, gave it to and was about to share it with Phil, and dropped it in the hot dust of the Meseta and was very apologetic. And Phil said, no, I want to eat the candy bar because I want to be in communion with all those people that have walked the trail. And he wanted to physically ingest the pilgrim dust because of the energy, that the imbuedness of that dust, if I may. And one of the things that really delighted him about his backyard Camino is that as people came to walk with him, they would bring the dirt from their feet and their experience. So he had like people from South Korea, he had a Native American chief, he had all of these people bringing their kind of their reliquary dust and embedding the trail. And he said, it's Camino dust, it's magic, it's in the air here. And I think that there's kind of a nice way to think of this through Victor and Edith Turner's idea of communitas. Really, they're talking about the pilgrim group, but they bring the term actually out of the liturgy where it was originally embedded. And as I was interviewing people for my book, the more I talked to artists, the more people would say, you know, when I made contact with that Black Madonna, or when I touched, you know, the tree of Jesse on the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, I felt a sense of connection with all the people that have gone before and all the people who will come again in the future. So communitas kind of took on this extra temporal dimension. And I just kind of love that idea of togetherness. And this also kind of goes back to Phil, because when he was walking his backyard Camino, he kept a trail guide, and he would write how many miles he was walking in his backyard and where he was in Spain, right? So he'd walk X amount of miles, and then he'd be in Burgos, or he'd be in the next city, like 5 miles or 6 miles or 20 miles down the road. And he'd note where he was. And he also wrote the weather, and he'd write who was walking with him, you know, whether he was going for a walk with his dog Stora, whether he was with the neighbor down the road. And eventually he started to write not alone on times when he was ostensibly alone. So on those times that he was walking by himself in the backyard, it was those moments that he felt the most connected to all the people who had walked his backyard trail and all the people that he had walked with on the Camino de Santiago, because they weren't physically there, but they were there really with him in a communitas that transcends kind of time and space. So I just wanted to kind of add to the discussion about this idea of walking alone, because for me, I don't think I really ever am when I'm doing these long distance walks.
I wonder if we should open up to a couple of questions as we're talking of the communitas, and see where the other voices might come through. Yeah, I think we've got one from the first one that came through from Anne de Forest, if you want to unmute, in regards to ambulatories in churches among pilgrimage routes.
Sorry, I can't hear. I have trolley. Sandra asked a question that kind of inspired about walking and art galleries, but that, as people were talking, I just was in southern France, and I was in some churches that were on the pilgrimage route. And I was very struck by the ambulatories. And as people were talking, you know, where you come to a big pilgrimage church that's really a stop on the way in the larger pilgrimage, but there's this space where people walk around, and you know, there are chapels, saints, there are relics, and there are things that you visit along the way. But in the context of what everybody was talking about, I was also thinking a lot about the relationship, thanks to Roxana, between fatigue and then the need to rest, and also fatigue and being out in the sun and the need to come indoors from the outside, but still walk. So I just was curious about how that translates. It's almost like you do a microcosmic pilgrimage within the architecture of the church as you're in part of the larger pilgrimage, but it's also maybe a more restful or calming walk than the one that you've just been on to get to this way station. So I just, that was a thought that was kindled in me, and I was curious if anybody had a thought about that.
Bill, I saw your head nodding away there. I don't know if you wanted to respond.
Yeah, sure. And absolutely. The ambulatory is sort of a replication of what you're doing by getting there in the first place. Particularly the ambulatories with all their different chapels are teaching you about the saints. You have to remember that all of these edifices were constructed in largely pre-literate days for most of the population. And so the way you're getting your information about saints' lives and the life of Jesus and so on is by looking at the windows, by looking at the statues, by figuring out who the saints are, by what they're holding. or carrying, or if their head has been cut off or whatever else, you have the ambulatory is a place of instruction. And I really like your point that yes, it's a cool version of what you've just done out there in the hot sun. And the ambulatories continue to strike people. There's a beautiful picture by Van Gogh of an ambulatory of a church, where he just makes it bigger than the church itself. He's looking at the church from the back and everything, and you can just see through his swirling brush strokes the motion that carries people around them. And because they actually take you up one side of the outside one side of the church all the way around and then back out, they function as sort of a traffic flow pattern too. That's part of it. Generally, your pilgrim is not allowed to go up on the main altar, but you can get closer to God in a sense by spending time in the ambulatory and getting back. So it's almost like a backstage tour in a way of the church experience.
Yeah, thanks. I'm thinking too of how there, whether like talking about contemporary pilgrimages, are there ways that in terms of making art that these little sanctuaries along the way can be replicated, places that are of rest or places that you move at a slower or more contemplative space that prepares you for the journey ahead, prepares you for the ultimate destination, if anybody knows of anything like that.
I do know that there's like at sites associated with particularly Black Madonnas, these like really beautiful miraculous Virgin Marys. Like I'm thinking of the one in Le Puy and Montserrat, for example. Along the way, like as you're going on these Marian pilgrimages, there'll be like these little they're kind of like third-class relics, but not quite, because they're associated with the Virgin Mary. But they'll be like these prayer cards that have an image of the kind of ultimate Marian image that you're going to see, that are around the neck and then through the grate of the images along the way. So you're kind of like getting a little bit of, you're getting a little sense of what's to come as you encounter these images as you proceed towards the shrine of the Black Madonna. So they're like little laminated cards that have usually been like touched. They're like authenticated to have been touched to like the Black Madonna of Montserrat or the Madonna of Puy-en-Velay, which is kind of an example because you're kind of like, you're going to these, I mean, I don't think that there needs to be necessarily like a hierarchy of smaller images in the lead up to the major image, but it just seems to be a tradition that's developed regardless at various sites.
Yeah, that sounds great. I was thinking about the word I used in my question was fortify, and I was thinking of this idea that you get, fortified, you're getting like, or prepared. Yeah, thank you both.
Great. Well, Andrew, what do you think? We're time to wrap up, I think. Just want to say thank you to everyone for sharing your perspectives this evening, and really looking forward to our next session as well. But yeah, going to spend a lot of time distilling today's chat, and I wonder, Andrew, any closing remarks from me?
Hand over, I think, to the last word from each of the speakers. And Laura, do you want to do a kind of summation after that, or do you want to do a kind of summation before?
No, great. I'll do it at the end.
Okay, and just to say, of course, the next pilgrimage event that we have on is Stories from the Road, and details of that in the chat. And we look forward to seeing many of you then as well. But I'll hand back to you, Laura.
Yeah, I guess a close remark then from our amazing panelists. Maybe Clara, do you have a closing thought?
Well, if you give me voice, I will end up with a comment about what Bill said in one of his speaking of Saint Benedict. There was a sentence saying that Catholic Church would think that pilgrimage blend a spiritual purpose with physical practice, and that was a problem. Now this is not only a problem, but now we know that without the body we cannot have any spiritual practice in pilgrimage. So that will be my ending for me. the pilgrimage is a body thing. We are here in the screens, but it would be much more fantastic if we would be there with our bodies.
I guess as a last word, I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about what is, kind of, even though that the Camino crosses grounds and looks like a layered path with burial sites and churches and things that we've been talking about as really important to the experience. What isn't a archaic or is the path. Rather, it's the drive. The drive to be pulled towards the edge of the known, and to a world that's greater than ourselves. And it's one of the things that really the walk has shown me, that in the many ways the hunger that we have predates Santiago, predates Christianity, and it's not answered by the nearness to that we found in the internet or globalization. And it's with as we've discussed, walking is what gives us this kind of communion and these kind of thin spaces that join us all together. Thank you.
Everyone's done me.
Oh, okay, I could say a little something. The thing that struck me most out of all the remarks that have been made tonight, which are many and varied and fascinating, is Clara saying it's really not the pilgrimage that counts, it's the walking. That's what does it to you. So she's really brought walking back to the fore, and just now she really insisted on the body. So I'm very, very struck by that. For myself, what I want to say by way of summation is that through the course of this series, I've learned how much pilgrimage is variable, complex, contradictory. It can be so social, so individual. And as I said, my little point to add to all this vis-a-vis the iconography is that you can't tell what a pilgrim really is doing or thinking from the outside. But if you look at the artwork, particularly after a couple hundred years, you can really see fairly clearly what's important. And so I think it is really valuable to study, as all of our panelists have done, the nature of walking as an art and walking representations in art. And it's quite clear that they are deeply interpenetrated and that you really can't separate walking art from walking pilgrimage. The two really go together in a fascinating way. So I'm very happy to have participated in this wonderful set of discussions.
I guess I'll just say that I think listening to the talks tonight and the really great questions is just that I think really connection is key with each other, with the sacred landscape and with the divine.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, this evening, I think at the end of each session, I've been kind of trying to summarize it. And the key is impossible every time, but the key words that have come out today are really this liminality, the dissolving nature of the pilgrimage, the masks that will dissolve. I think, in all senses of that, in terms of the physical and the spiritual, well, even that is encased within a material, and we can dissolve that if we want to. And I think also the myth making that you're talking about, Bill, is at a time when that is also being dissolved, the ambiguity of whose land it is and land ownership, and I think, dissolving all of that. So I'm just taking dissolve, thin spaces where we can rewrite and re-storytell, and continually be doing this as kind of this cool creative community. So yeah, thank you. Dissolve is the takeaway, I think. So yeah, let's dissolve into the ether tonight, and we'll see you all next month.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, everybody. I'll try and get the video edited as soon as possible to share things in the summary blog that we're keeping up. And yeah, do come and join us next month. And a big thank you to Laura, especially for being the major host today. and especially a big thanks to our presenters. And everyone have a good morning, good lunchtime, good evening, good day, wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.